And that's economics.
Banks can be fundamentally unstable and so need to be properly regulated. Sometimes, as in the 2008 global financial crisis, banks can fail, putting pressure on the entire system. This can result in an economic meltdown with higher borrowing costs and plunging prices. Economies can enter a downward spiral of rapidly increasing unemployment and bankruptcies. Thanks to this year's economics laureates, the world has improved its ability to avoid both serious financial crises and expensive bailouts. Douglas Diamond and Philip Dybvig developed theoretical models explaining why banks exist and why they're vulnerable to rumors of collapse, and how regulation can reduce a run on banks.
Stabilization of our financial system is an essential precondition for economic recovery.
Ben Bernanke's research on the Great Depression provides insights into the thinking behind economic policymaking during more recent financial crises. The work of all this year's laureates played an important role in ensuring the COVID economic slowdown did not develop into a new Great Depression.
Professor Ben Bernanke, we saw in the 2008 financial crisis when the banks were bailed out. In many cases, these were investment banks. The money which had been lost was money that belonged to other financial institutions, and it was the taxpayer who had to pay to have them bailed out, and that caused a lot of consternation and anger.
It did cause a lot of consternation because people properly thought, well, why are we helping the people who caused the crisis in the first place? I would point out that if the system collapses, then not just the people on Wall Street, but people on Main Street will be badly hurt. And I think it's important for people to know that all the money that was put into the banks was paid back with interest.
But Doug Diamond, I mean, your research combined with Phil Dybvig looks at this need for, governments providing deposit insurance so that when ordinary consumers, households invest their savings in a bank, that they don't all go and withdraw their money if they think the bank's going to collapse, because you say it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So tell us what your work shows about the need for that kind of deposit insurance.
So the point of the work Phil and I did is that the basic function, one basic function that banks do is making their deposits more liquid than the underlying assets that they hold. That means paying people more than you could pay everybody if they took their money out. So there's a problem of sort of the baby in the bathwater. If you're doing this activity, you are somehow subject to this run problem, the self-fulfilling run. And there are various incomplete ways to get around it, but it seems like the one that has worked the best is having a solvent government insure the deposits, as you say. So that seems like for this set of activities, regulated commercial banks, it's worked quite well. Now the trouble is this activity of creating liquidity, you don't have to be a bank to do it. So it's moved over time to these other unregulated institutions. And Lehman Brothers, we were just talking about, Lehman Brothers had a run. And it looked like in 2008, the run was spreading to all these financial institutions that finance themselves short term. And then unless you end up having deposit insurance for one and all, it's very hard to use that solution.
What's interesting is that it's unusual for a practitioner such as you, Ben Bernanke, you were former chairman of the Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank, to be awarded the Nobel Prize. It was for your work that you had done earlier on the Great Depression. But Doug and Phil, do you feel at all tempted to enter the fray of the real world, as it were, in terms of working with politicians and policymakers, or are you quite happy just doing your research?
During the 2007 to 2010 period, when we had the global financial crisis, I actually got involved for pretty much the first time in policy, in the White House, and got invited to a seminar at the Federal Reserve on flights to quality.
Did you enjoy it, that spell?
Initially, but then there's something called being a public intellectual, where people hurl insults at you. That was not my favorite part of it.
Did you get that, Ben Bernanke?
Oh, yes, they created stress balls. Stress balls that you squeeze,
Yeah.
they created them in the shape of me. So when people got upset, they could squeeze, But so there certainly was a lot of blowback.
Phil Dybvig, what about you? Would you be tempted to go into the
I have
making world?
thought about this on and off, and I'm willing to do it at a distance. I mean, I have a friend who's at the SEC, and I often try to find a time at the meetings to ask what are the policy things going on and talk about it. But at one point, actually, I was visiting the St. Louis Fed periodically, hoping that I would have some influence in policy and an opportunity to give something back.
Right.
But I felt like I didn't have any there.
It's not yours, yeah.
But I think overall, I'm more in the curiosity and fundamental research, and so the division of labor makes sense for me to be doing that.
So, I mean, clearly, unlike you, the scientists here, they are applauded when they go into the realms of into the practical world for coming up with new drugs and pills and so on. But you say that sometimes you get brickbats thrown at you. Now, I mean, I must ask you, obviously, because there are a lot of people concerned about what's going on in the economy, the global economy now. We've got all sorts of factors at play, obviously, the food and energy crisis. We've got the slowdown in China, which has also brought down global growth and so on. Are you, gentlemen, worried at all about a global recession? Is it going to get worse? Ben Bernanke?
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, our problem now is high inflation in many countries. Yeah. We're much better off, I think, than the 1970s because central banks are much more focused on the inflation. They have much more credibility with the public. But as the Federal Reserve and the Riksbank and the European Central Bank and so on raise interest rates in order to fight the inflation, potentially one side effect would be a slowing economy or even a moderate recession. I don't know, but it's a possibility.
Phil, do you think we're in for a tough time?
I'm a little worried about the economy, but I have to put in a disclaimer that the issues that I'm worried about are kind of outside of my main expertise.
Yeah.
And I don't see, at least in the United States, financial crisis getting started at this point. There is kind of a mini financial crisis in cryptocurrency, which is a whole other story. But cryptocurrency is small and relatively unimportant for the economy at this point.